I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Andrew Price.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty, so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Silibil N Brains.
Who are Silibil N Brains? Well, they were a hip-hop duo from Huntington Beach, California, who rose to prominence in the UK scene during the early 2000s. They were branded as the next big thing in globally oriented rap. They had larger-than-life personas, were former proteges of Eminem, and had the lyrics and rapping skills to back up their jackass-inspired prankster natures. Only issue being, Silibil N Brains lied their way to the top. Act 1. Remember Wee Man? Persona. The ever-elusive architecture of the self. The crystalline castle of all your greatest qualities. Or maybe your weakest moments. If you were going to build a persona with the explicit point of catapulting yourself to the highest echelons of fame and fortune, what would it consist of? Would you position yourself as a member of the intellectual elite? Someone from a similar background as to where you're naturally from? An impassioned advocate of the downtrodden? Someone who has an inflated sense of self? Someone who's the exact opposite of who you are? Orson Welles constructed a persona for himself before he made his mark on the worlds of acting, theater, and film. He literally went to Scotland and traveled around attempting to find work as a painter. With little success in the field, the autodidact devoted himself to the stage. He approached an acclaimed Scottish theater company and claimed to be a boy genius theater director wunderkind from America, with numerous productions under his belt. Being someone who was a voracious reader and blessed with a massive heaping of self-confidence, he landed the role of director for the company, or at least that's how the urban legend goes. Because the internet didn't exist then, there was no way for anyone to verify his claims. So he embarked on directing one of his many adaptations of Shakespeare. And thankfully, our young Orson had the skills to back up his blustering persona. A few short years later, when Orson moved to New York, with sights set on Broadway, he pulled a similar ruse, only with the added truth that he had in fact now been a director in Scotland. And guess what? It worked again. And Orson Welles' loose affiliation with what many would term the truth would grow into legend. The rotund, iconic filmmaker would have an ever-elastic relationship with concepts like fact and honesty. And this path to success, whether knowingly or not, was emulated by two young men who claimed to be from San Jacinto, California, or Huntington Beach, depending on the day or the week that you ask them. So, where did these two rap phenomenons actually meet? Dundee, Scotland, at the aptly named Dundee College. In an additionally cinematic meet-cute, our two twin protagonists met when Gavin Bain literally fell into a college class 10 minutes late, scooped himself up off the floor like a human cartoon character, feigned an over-the-top apologetic behavior to the professor. He then sat down next to his future artistic collaborator, Billy Boyd. In an era run by jackass, skateboarding videos, and flat-ironed haircuts, these two boys from Scotland were anything but. Their lower middle-class clothes and rough Scottish brogues belied a future filled with small-town pub fights, no award show shenanigans, and definitely no platinum records on their walls. Billy Boyd was from Dundee. He'd never lived anywhere else in his whole entire life. And he'd been dating the same girl, Mary, since they were young teenagers. Gavin Bain's family moved to a neighboring town to Dundee when he was just a child from South Africa. Being the eternal immigrant, Baines had to reinvent himself as a Scottish teenager. He gradually lost the accent and attempted to become the picturesque Scottish man. He only lacked one thing: self-confidence, which is exactly what drew him to Billy Boyd. Boyd's charisma was a thing of legend. He exuded it. When they would go to pubs, Boyd was the life of the party. The slightly portly young man made up for his lack of physical attractiveness with his sheer force of will.
Why the shots fired?
I mean, dude, I think that's like hardwired into who this guy is. Like, did you end up watching that documentary that I recommended to you?
Yes.
Yeah. His haircuts in every, so this is running a little bit, but we're going to talk later about they end up having a documentary made about them during the course of this, called the Great Hip Hop Hoax. And it has a lot of footage from when they were teenagers meeting in college, or not teenagers, but when they were meeting in college and hanging out at pubs, and because they filmed themselves a lot. And Billy Boyd's hairstyle choices, fashion choices, they are so blatantly, I'm trying to be of the moment because I'm self-conscious about my body. Like his facial hair, where he had 3 different tiers of cuts put into his sideburns and beard, like 3 jagged lines cut into them.
Yeah.
Oof, that is a look.
But still, he exuded confidence, which made up for the fact that he was an ugly piece of shit.
No, man, but I think those things are interrelated. Like when you're somebody who is not what society deems as a typical or archetypical type of beauty, you find ways of endearing yourselves to your fellow humans, right? You find ways of compensating and navigating social situations. And I mean, Billy Boyd, you can say a lot of things about him. You can call him a rotund little bitch, but you know what? That motherfucker's got charisma. I don't actually think he's rotund. I don't know why I'm just going after this guy so hard.
That's the way you latched onto. You went deep into the research, and what you came out with was, fuck that guy's face.
Yeah, I don't actually think that at all. I mean, I think he's a perfectly fine looking dude. I just mean, when you're trying to be someone who is a globally recognized superstar, typically those people look like the motherfuckers that are on the CW.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're like grown in a vat of attractive people, like Samara Weaving. Is she a human? I don't know. Her face is so symmetrical, it's hard to look at. I'm like, what the fuck? Where did you come from?
Yeah, and like the band that is featured in the documentary that I guess they were friends with and hung out with, which I think they're another Scottish band, which they performed that song Year 3000 that ended up being covered by the Jonas Brothers, and that was like a big hit for them. But it was originally this band, I think they're called Busted. And yeah, those guys, they all look like underwear models.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that is not our boy Silibil and Brains. They were distinctly the jackass model of human, where it's like, I will just do whatever the fuck I have to do to get on.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's pissing in someone's hands and then having them rub it in my face, that's fine. That's what I'll do.
And if it's spending a minimum of 4 hours a day flat ironing my hair,
yep,
that's what I'll do.
That's what I'll do. The slightly portly young man made up for his lack of physical attractiveness with sheer force of will.
Just had to read it again.
Something Gavin Bain lusted after. The two discovered a mutual love of hip-hop, though. Eminem, D12, and Wu-Tang Clan. They started to write their own rap songs as a hobby. This quickly ballooned into a serious passion. Gavin Bain became obsessed with the idea of turning their hip-hop dalliances into a path forward. This is how they were going to escape the life constructed around them, which bar they would be drinking in tonight forever. Baines and Boyd and their friend Oscar Bravo Kirkwood started B Production, their own would-be Scottish Wu-Tang. Gavin became addicted to producing music. He was a demon with a singular fixation. He learned everything he could about the art and technical side of music production. He insisted that the other members study dictionaries and build up word banks. The only issue being, after struggling, self-producing work and honing their skills, and failing to produce any serious traction within Scotland, they found themselves staring down the concept of they might not be God's gift to hip-hop. And then they got what they thought was their big break. It was a talent search competition for rappers happening in London, England. They performed an audition for record label execs where they were literally laughed out of the room.
And then we see this thing online that says, "Are you the next Eminem?" This audition in London. So we take the 13-hour bus journey down. We get to Covent Garden super early in the morning. The queue is going around the block twice. We get into the audition, and so we go on. I start to rap, and then you just stop it. After about 30 seconds, the guy was like, "Look, there's Scotland and there's rap. We can't sell Scottish rap. You will never, ever make it in rap."
And they get called the rapping proclaimers, and that's kind of their like, that's their crushing low, where they thought they were going to go to this audition, they thought they were going to win this rap contest, this American Idol before American Idol, and they just got hard node, just fuck you, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, what between like, my knowledge of it isn't super in depth. But just from my basic knowledge of it and watching Train Spotting, why does everybody in the UK hate Scottish people so much?
I don't know either, dude. But like it is palpable. Like they talk about it all of the time.
I would say it's some weird like phenomenon of the way that we make fun of gingers. But then there's also the Irish, which don't seem to be as hated.
Yeah, I got nothing. I don't know enough about United Kingdom history and its colonial aspects to really be able to.
If we have any Scottish listeners out there, email us at andrew@deepcutspod.com or dave@deepcutspod.com. Choose your favorite.
Yeah, but let's be real. If you email me, I probably won't.
Oh yeah,
see it. Dave, I don't even know if I've ever even logged into that email address.
Never mind. Email andrew@deepcutspod.com, even if you prefer Dave.
Yeah, if you prefer me, you can just address the email to me when sending it to Andrew.
I don't want to cause controversy, but with Dave, the feeling is not mutual. But
the feeling is not mutual? Wait, what does that mean?
Any of your stands, the feeling's not mutual. I have love for my stands. I will respond to every email. But Dave can't even give you the respect of opening up his email account for the first time.
I need to do that.
But email us. If you're a Scottish listener, email us and let us know, why do people hate Scottish people so much in the UK?
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Also, our one listener from New Zealand who joined the Facebook group, maybe they know. Do you have any insight into this person from New Zealand? You're not American.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the key. Maybe you just have to be not American to know this piece of information.
Yeah, your accent sounds kind of like a South African accent, and our boy Gavin Bain is originally from South Africa, and he's Scottish. So let us know.
Yeah, let us know. They were crushed by this rejection, but
also let us know what it's like not living in a apocalyptic world.
Yeah,
where you can actually go outside.
What's it like to not have stormtroopers marching down your streets,
or just a horrible, deadly virus?
Yeah, that too. They were crushed by this rejection, but not just the rejection of the judges, the fact that they didn't fit in with the other people at the auditions. They felt that they didn't have the right clothing, that they just didn't have the right looks, and also that they were, bluntly put, white, and worse, Scottish. That's one aspect of this story that I feel like they kind of gloss over repeatedly, is that they make these kind of like weird allusions to like, I understand what it's like to be a minority because I'm Scottish.
Dave, we just talked about this. People hate Scottish people.
Yeah, I still feel like, I don't know. There's something weird going on there for me. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not well informed enough about the institutionalized slavery of the Scots.
Well, I mean, I don't know, because do they really say that? I don't think they say like anything about being a minority. They do a couple.
They never. You're right. They don't actually say those words, but in various interviews, they make very coded responses that are basically like, yes, we were pretending to be American and posing in that way, but we know what it's like to be beset, and we know that our skills are what our skills are, and we adhere to the sacred core of hip hop and of, you know, authenticity and in air quotes keeping it real. Like we know what that life is like because of this adversity that we've faced in these small towns as Scottish dudes. And I don't know, do you? Maybe they do. I don't know. That just rings kind of false to me.
I don't know. I maybe you saw. I don't think I personally saw anything like that. I saw them saying that the thing that I saw them say multiple times was more along the lines of, we weren't Milli Vanilli, our personas were fake, but our talent was real. That's what I saw. I never saw them saying anything about like, we understand what it's like to be from the streets, or whatever. I only ever saw them kind of saying,
you are
like,
right. They talk more. You are correct. It is more that I'm
but
primarily.
you might have saw something that I didn't.
I'm primarily thinking of an interview where they were talking about Iggy Azalea.
Oh, yeah. I saw that too.
Yeah, they were kind of talking about her in this very dismissive way of like, she's white and she twerks. That's her gimmick, blah, 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 blah. And I don't like her music, but I also don't like their music either. So, it felt like there was an interesting conversation to be had in general, just around the idea of appropriation and their literal appropriation of American culture, and then their appropriation of Black culture, and then their obvious passion for both of those things. Like, you don't live for a half a decade as an American without some sort of weird passion for it in some way. Like, even if it's just osmosis, you know what I mean?
Or Osmosis Jones. They just saw that movie
very
a lot.
underrated film.
They saw that movie a lot, and
they were just like, let's go live inside Bill Murray.
That was their end game.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're gonna become rappers. We're gonna pretend like we're Americans. We're gonna hang out with Eminem. We're gonna get hugely popular. We're gonna go on tour. Then we're gonna get so rich that we fund some kind of medical research that is able to shrink us down, and then we can live inside of Bill Murray for the rest of our lives.
On our tour bus, we only watch Inner Space, Osmosis Jones, and that other movie where they shrink down and go inside a guy, but I can't remember. Fantastic Voyage?
Yes.
Something Voyage?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Those 3 movies. Those are the only movies we watch, motherfucker. Movies with normal-sized people? I don't think so. The Borrowers? Okay, maybe. Secret Life of Ariete? Still The Borrowers, but okay.
Not Honey, I Shrunk the Kid. We're talking about living inside of a person. We don't want to deal with any of that, like being lost in a fucking lawn, fighting scorpions and shit. That sounds scary.
That's what I'm saying. Joe Johnston, he used all the original storyboards that were by fucking what's-his-face, director of Reanimator, who got fired at the last second. Did Joe Johnston even direct that movie? I don't know. Although storyboards weren't his.
What I'm saying is I want to live inside of Bill Murray.
Look at me right now. Do you see this face? My face is slowly evolving into Bill Murray's face. That's how deep my passion is.
We will shrink ourselves.
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
We're talking about transhumanism, Dave.
Mm-hmm. Gavin, Billy, and Oscar were crestfallen. Moments of opportunity didn't come often when you lived in Scotland. This could have literally been their only chance at a big break, but they refused to give in. They started working harder on music, recording more, rehearsing more, but they didn't have anything to do with this material. Out of frustration, they began calling every record label in London to no avail. They just wanted to show someone their work, but it was just a sea of rejection. Until one day, Billy Boyd fell into a genius-level grift.
So we started phoning and we were saying like, hi, we're rappers from Scotland, can you, and it was, hang up. And so we tried again, like, hi, we're a hip-hop group from Dundee. And no one was interested. Oh, sorry guys, it's not our thing. It's not what we're looking for. We felt like we were back in the audition in London again. It was my turn to phone in for a complete joke and to sort of pick our spirits up. I spoke an American accent.
I'm trying to get a record deal here.
I just said, hey, we're from California and we're coming to London to try and get a show. And people were like, oh wow, can you send us on your music? And we were like, what? Like, really? So we did it again and we tried and we were, hi, we're from California and we'd love to send you guys our demo. And oh yeah, send us it. This is great. You're really interested. And it kind of felt like, but we're the same music, it's the same thing. So why would we be interested?
That was kind of shocking, you know. That was just kind of like, okay, this has got nothing to do with how good we are. This has got nothing to do with talent. If you want to get on a label, then you just have to be marketable.
This is what we're doing wrong, Dave. Whenever we talk to people and they ask us, we say, oh yeah, like I was born and raised in New Mexico or Arizona, moved to LA in like X year. We just have to say that we're from California.
Yes. That definitely is the moral to take away from that.
We wouldn't have to be doing this shit.
None of this fucking podcast bullshit. To his surprise, the record exec on the other end was amenable and asked to hear his work. Literally the only time this had ever happened. In shocked silence, Gavin Baines suggested an idea that would fundamentally alter the course of the two boys' lives forever. In a soft voice, he sheepishly suggested an idea that was so insane, so outlandish, and so stupid that it just might work. You want to read that in a Scottish accent?
What if we moved to London and pretended to be American? What if we moved to London and pretended to be What if we I can't do it. And the funny thing is, like, I feel like I fuck up on like impersonations all the time on this show, but like sometimes I can do them, but I can't do it like on cue. Like I can slip into something, and obviously it's subjective, but I feel like I can do pretty good impersonations of things sometimes, but like I can't do it on purpose.
No, I can.
It has to like
that.
Organically happen.
Yeah,
so
you definitely have the impression skill, but man, it's like an untamed horse. When you're on like a really good impression streak, it is great. But when I ask you, hey, can you do a Scottish accent to end this act, it is so bad.
God damn it.
What if we moved to London and pretended to be Americans?
This reminds me of that time that I suggested that we should pretend to be Americans so that we could do this podcast.
Shut the fuck up. Thanks for listening to this episode. You should definitely go like the Facebook page for the Deep Cuts Pod, because we do lots of cool video content on there that you'll be sure to like. Also, please join our Facebook group.
That's Deep Cuts Podcast on Facebook and the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Also follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod.
Act 2. Can you remake me, bro? Art is context. It's the idea of constructing a pocket universe where the artist defines the world and its rules. A true artist excels at constructing a narrative, whether it's Picasso's recontextualization of perspective focal points or Duchamp's trickster approach to an artist's relationship with the physical space and act of creation. Or Orson Welles and his brilliant ability to reshape his personal history. All these artists are recontextualizing themselves within a whole. They're building a pocket universe for themselves and their work. Their main issue here being, history is written by the winners. So, are these creators charlatans? Did Orson Welles lie his way to the top? Did Picasso steal his plain old asymmetry from African masks and just conveniently forget to mention it? Did Duchamp just make a mockery of a millennia of artists who dedicated themselves to mastering a craft out of sheer laziness? Inarguably, yes, but they still won in the end. And here we are, discussing them now, decades after they've left the mortal coil. And this is the internal conversation that Billy Boyd and Gavin Baines were having with themselves. Should we do this? Can we get away with this? What happens if we get caught? All of these ran through their heads. And the answer that they inevitably landed on was...
Fuck it. Let's roll the dice. Fuck it. Let's roll the dice. Why? Why?
I can't even handle how bad that is. And the answer they inevitably landed on was, fuck it. Let's roll the dice. They had settled on it. Gavin and Billy were going to move to London. They were going to hard reboot their lives. And they were going to attempt to fool record execs into thinking that they were California-based rappers. They approached Oscar Bravo Kirkland, the third member of B Production, about the idea, but he just couldn't do it. The soft-spoken man didn't have the fortitude to pursue such an enterprise. Bluntly put, he didn't have a psychopathic level of dedication that both Gavin Baines and Billy Boyd did. And he's probably better off because of it. Well, now they'd said it aloud. They'd spoken the chaos magic ritual. They'd said it to each other. Now, they had to do it. They had to pursue this to the ends of the earth. Baines and Boyd procured maps and information about California because neither of them had ever been there. They came up with fake backstories. They re-recorded all their music with their new accents. They began to develop their new personas further. They built out Silibil N Brains. The lamest names ever.
Yeah, it's like Brains. What was it? Brains McCoy or
Brains McLeod.
Brains McLeod.
Yeah,
What?
Brains McLeod is Gavin Bain's character's name, and Silibil, which is a play on both silly Bill and syllable, like the multiple the micro unit that make up sentence
Silibil
words.
and Brains.
Silibil and Brains, and it's not even and brains; it's brains.
Brains.
Silibil Brains.
Remember, we've talked about this. It's really so strange. It's so surreal that we're getting into this and discovering what they did and the trajectory of this story. Remember when we talked about this on a previous episode? This idea.
We talked about these guys?
No, we talked about this thing. I forget what episode it was on, but we specifically talked about, number one, how I had always wanted to.
Oh, the thing where you always pretended to be an English kid? Or no, you went to and you pretended to be a foreign kid at like a improv class or summer class or something.
Yeah, well, you're mixing up two things. The first thing is that I had always wanted to just start a class and just have like a weird accent and just like do the whole class like that. And I never followed through with it because I just always kind of forgot to do it starting in the class and just never happened. But then the other thing that we talked about was that we went to this day-long improv festival / workshop that was at a college, and me and my friend decided to just do the whole thing as these like Eastern European characters. I mean, number one, it was in some shades it was fun. I think the funnest part of it was that we did the whole thing the whole day and like actually got people buying into it. And then the sort of reveal at the end, because every school did like a scene. And so we did a scene from Chicago and our characters just had like fully American accents. And, I guess maybe somebody might have been like, oh yeah, they're just really good at doing American accents. But like, it was, I don't think anybody thought that. Like, it was blatant. Like, anybody who was in the audience was like, what the fuck? But so there was parts of it that were fun, but I think overwhelmingly the main takeaway I took from it was immediately exhausting. And I wanted to stop doing it after the first hour. Like it was the Andrew WK episode, because I talked about how, getting trapped in the persona and how it's probably almost kind of like torturous. And we were talking about that, and I was saying like, I did that for like a day, for like 8 hours. And in the first hour, I was already over it. And I just was like, fuck, like we have to keep doing this. Like we can't, it would be so awkward to just stop this right now. So we just have to commit to this. And it's like, it's just, it's exhausting to have to keep that up. So, it's so surreal and interesting from multiple perspectives. 'Cause number one, it's so crazy that they did it and that they lived like this for years. But also it's crazy that they did it and nobody ever noticed or nobody ever realized. Nobody was like, they never slipped out of it. Nobody was ever like, wait a minute, didn't you just speak in a Scottish? I mean, that maybe kind of happened once, but nobody was ever like, wait a minute, you guys aren't American. And that's really crazy, because the first thing that pops into mind, the show Farscape.
You have me.
It was an American show. It was created by an American, but it was an Australian production. It was all shot in Australia. And so some of the key main characters were American, and they had just relocated to Australia, but most of the cast of the show, the larger cast of the show, were all Australian actors. And so the show is, I mean, some of the characters are doing accents, but a lot of the characters on the show are Australian actors doing American accents, because they're trying to make the show feel like an American show.
Power Rangers.
Yeah, which is what happens a lot. Like a lot of shows are shot in Canada, and it's all Canadian actors, except for maybe the few of the main actors. But they really try to swallow their Canadianism, because they're trying to make the show feel American. But the tell with those actors on Farscape is no matter how convincing their American accent is, they always let the intrusive R slip in, because people in Anglo countries like Australia, the UK, when there's two consonants next to each other in two words, like if a word ends with a consonant and then begins with a consonant, no, it's not ends with a consonant and begins with a consonant. It's ends with a consonant and then begins with a vowel. So here's an example. In the United States, we say law and order, but in the UK or Australia, they say law and order. They add an R between W and A. And it makes it smoother to say. It allows you to to kind of roll off your tongue. And it's an affectation that's specific to those regions. So that's the tell, is even though they're all doing convincing American accents, they still put the R in, they still use the intrusive R. And I actually learned that from watching Farscape, because I was like, why? I was kind of curious about, I can tell that there's something off about their dialect that's like making it obvious that they're actually Australian, but I couldn't quite wrap my mind around what it was. And so I looked it up and discovered this thing about the intrusive R and how it's used. And like I said, once again, you watch that show and a lot of the actors are doing very convincing American accents, but it's a TV show. So there's a lot more dialogue and it's over a longer period of time. I think you can control that more in a movie, and, you can convincingly get away with Christian Bale seeming like he's totally American, and to the point where like a lot of people didn't realize he was British for a long time, because he was doing the American accent in interviews, because he said he didn't want to be doing an interview and to confuse kids and for them to be like, what, Batman is British? So he would actually do the accent in interviews. And so a lot of people just didn't realize he was British. But over that longer period of time of watching a TV show with multiple seasons, those things slip through the cracks. And it's even crazier that they got away with this for 2 years or whatever it was, and nobody ever was like, you sound like you're Scottish doing an American accent.
Yeah.
Like that never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it's a testament to their commitment. They decided that they were from San Jacinto, which also, I live in fucking California. Never heard of San Jacinto before. And I thought that shit was made up. I thought they just made up a city in California, but they didn't. It's a real place.
I mean, that's kind of part of the genius. Like, if they had said they were from LA, imagine how much ground that they would have to cover. They would have to learn so much about it. It's this huge thing with all these different cultural pieces of iconography and reference points. But just some super obscure little town in like the greater Los Angeles area that just has nothing significant about it. It's just far less things that you have to learn. And it also sounds kind of more convincing. Like it's so obscure that it seems real. And so you don't question it.
They'd turn themselves into Jim Carrey and Jackass and Redman, walking, talking cartoons. They'd buy all new clothes. They'd remake themselves as skate kids, punk rappers. They leaned into their natural frat boy antics, but then dialed them up 500%. They didn't know anything about American culture, though, so they developed a system. During interviews, only one of the boys would, in air quotes, lead, and the other one would, in air quotes, support. Meaning whatever lies Boyd was telling, Baines was not to contradict him and would to play support. He'd play backup. He'd try and shore up any narrative weaknesses and just generally play continuity cop. Think the dude bro version of yes and. They were exceedingly dedicated. They had sex in this accent. They lived in this accent. And remember, this is before they actually moved to London. They were still living in Scotland in their small towns, working their odd jobs, being unemployed, and just pretending to be American. After a time period of studying, they finally saved up enough money to move to London and lived in a single studio room apartment with Baines' sister, still being American 24 hours a day. I can't really imagine what that would be like. Like if my sister just rolled up and was like, okay, I'm going to live with you now in this tiny ass studio apartment, but I'm just going to do an English accent all day, every day. I would strangle her. Like not only would I strangle her for living in my fucking studio, but also being this character that is so annoying and like theater kid, look at me, attention seeking behavior that I couldn't even handle that.
I'd love it.
No, you wouldn't.
I'd join in.
Would you really? Would you really?
I'd break out my Scottish accent. And I'd be like, let me be in your rap group. I'll be the token Scottish guy. People will really believe it after I join in.
I love that you are attempting to be this.
I don't even know what it sounds like.
No, you really don't. No.
I think it's like a wholly unique sound. I think I've made an accent that nobody has ever heard before.
So they'd done it, right? They'd moved to London. All the hard stuff was over. Well, no. No record labels even knew who they were. They wanted to make a big statement. They needed to get seen. They needed to be in the scene. But how? And then a golden opportunity landed in their laps again. They landed a gig at a local London talent showcase. They showed up, in character, they waited to go on, and, well, they followed a Boyz II Men R&B singing group. The crowd was against them. They weren't excited about these two white rappers. They really didn't want any punk dudes running around on stage. And then Silibil N Brains said the magic words.
Never mind. I could just...
You can just say it. You don't have to do it in the accent.
We're from California, dudes.
And the crowd started cheering. They had found the skeleton key to reality. Their gig went well. They performed their set, even battle rapping in between songs to each other. And when they got off stage, an Island Records exec named Chris Rock approached them. He said he wanted to make a record. He wrote down a list of managers and told them to get in touch and say that he had sent them. And they were off to the fucking races. That is just... I think that is this part of the story that's the most unfathomable to me. The fact that they had one gig, and not only was it one of the most powerful record producers in the UK scene, but also that his name was the same name as the famous American comedian. Like, that's like, all right, and now we're going to get discovered by Isaac Newton, the really famous record producer. It's just so strange.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, I mean, just in general, whether it's you pretending like you're from a place or not, or just genuinely being from the place, I know that this is a thing that happens. I know that obviously there's a lot of examples of celebrities. We've even talked about it on previous episodes, but celebrities who don't really resonate in the United States, but then they have these like large fan bases in other countries, like David Hasselhoff with Germany and Jerry Lewis with the French, and I'm sure there's plenty of other ones. We kind of talked about how Andrew WK,
Anvil
mm-hmm.
in Big in Japan.
Yeah. And there's a lot of I mean, Andrew WK kind of had like some more notoriety in Japan, and there's other bands that have resonated in like Japan specifically. There's a lot of American bands who kind of have popularity there when they didn't really find it in the US. So much to the point that it's kind of like a stereotype. Like Big in Japan is like a thing. There's a Tom Waits song that's called Big in Japan, and there's a lot of stand-ups who American stand-up comics who go over to the UK as almost this thing of like, oh, I can't really hack it in the United States in this like very large pool, so I go to the UK where it's like a smaller pond, and then you have a lot of comedians that live over there and have just sort of carved that out as their racket, and that's really interesting. I mean, you know, it's even more interesting to almost do like the weird meta version of that, where you're like, I realize that Americans can kind of stand out and they're a little bit more novelty over here, so we can just pretend like we're Americans. But it's also just interesting in general. I know it's done, like I just kind of went through, but I wonder why more people don't try to do that. Like if you're just, it seems like kind of a smart move. It's like if you're really not that concerned with being this huge mega celebrity on the sort of commonly accepted as like the main stage of fame, which is being large in the United States, which is just kind of globally regarded as like the one place that is the be all end all of fame. It seems like more people would kind of have that idea of like, oh yeah, I'll just move over to the UK and just say I'm from America and people will like me.
They met with Jonathan Shalit, the mega manager. During their initial meeting, they just straight up said,
We're not getting out of bed for 65K.
You're done now. You're just like, I'm done doing this voice.
But I mean,
oh no, technically that's right. They're doing it in the American voice.
We're not getting out of bed unless it's 60.
We're not getting out of bed for less than 65.
We're not getting out of bed for less than 65K, dude. Pizza.
To which Shallot replied,
how about 70, old chap? That's not even the type of British accent he has. He has like a London accent.
Yeah.
Oi, Gov. How about 70?
Shallot Global.
That wasn't bad.
That wasn't bad. How much of
that is? He says that it's funny because we'll get more into this as the episode goes on, and we'll talk about the documentary and sort of the later on years. But Gavin, as kind of like the primary driving force in just pushing the narrative of Silibil N Brains, Billy, kind of in a lot of ways, even though they obviously both had a lot of dedication to this, he's kind of much more in the passenger seat of just kind of being along for the ride. Gavin's the guy who is pushing this all the time and sort of consumed by it. And he has these canned responses that he gives. Like if you watch different interviews, and this happens all the time, every celebrity develops these things and they repeat them in different interviews and stuff like that. So this isn't like unique to these guys in what they did with their whole act and their whole personas. But he has these canned responses of these things that he says every time throughout the years, whether it's like the interviews from 2013 all the way up to interviews that literally just came up a month ago. He has these specific phrases and these specific things that he says. And this is one of them, this phrasing of like, we're not getting out of bed for less than 65K, like when he's retelling the story. Do you think that that's true, that that's really what they said? Do you think that they really had that level of like cockiness in that moment to like lay that down like that, of like they're sitting there with this huge manager who's offering them like the potential of fame and fortune, this thing that they've literally wanted all their lives and have been working towards for the last several years, and they really pulled out that power move of like, we're not doing this for less than 65,000 per person?
I don't know. There's a lot of that with this story, especially when you get into some stuff we're going to talk about later where there are multiple versions of the narrative.
Yeah, exactly. There's multiple versions, and that's what I kind of mean is like, even though there's the canned responses, other details of it shift and change. So it's very clear that it's not exactly the way that they tell it. Plus, I feel like Gavin is a little bit of an unreliable narrator because...
A little bit?
Well,
I mean...
Yeah.
A lot of it.
In just the way he tells the story. He has an agenda. He's trying to build up a mythology around himself for the sake of fame and opportunity. There's a lot of subjectivity in taking anything that he says at face value. Plus, there's some other stuff that we'll talk about. I really want to talk about when we get to the documentary stuff. Neither of them come off to me, even in their fake persona characters, even in their American badass douchebag characters. Neither of them strike me as a Troy Duffy type who would just be like, fuck that, 65 or we walk. I can't imagine either of those guys doing that, even in their characters.
Yeah.
Like this is all they wanted. And they were not cocky enough to risk losing that.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment, but the narrative that they say is that, which, listener, do with that what you will.
That one New Zealand listener, what do you think? Andrew at deepcutspod.com. Do you think that they actually said 65 or we'll walk?
Shallot Global set them up with a studio, recording space, producers, and paid for them to make music. They did it. They won. They got the deal. They signed. Shallot Global was going to basically help them make a demo, and then they were going to take that to record labels, and they were going to be off to the races. They're winning at life. They're getting everything they want. All their wildest dreams are coming true. The question is, did they feel guilty for pulling this grift and lying to all these people? No, not at all. This was their destiny. They were meant to make music. So what if they had to lie about where they were from? The music was still pure, and it was still an accurate reflection of themselves. And that's what everyone was truly attracted to, right? Not the story, not the accents, not the show. It was the music, right?
That part of that question is really interesting to me because that's what I've thought a lot about. Because really, what is the difference between this and Andrew WK? Like what is the difference between this and any other music group or whatever that has like crafted this fictional backstory. Other than that, the record executives were in the know about it. It even more illuminates this original problem, which is why they did this in the first place, of this sort of like, I mean, I don't know, discrimination. I don't know if that's the right term to use. I don't think it's that far, but this idea that like nobody took Scottish people as rappers seriously. And at this time, there was this level of attention that you could get from being an American, specifically from being an American from California or whatever, that they had this idea to tap into. And the fact that if they had revealed it and came clean, it would have been such a bad fallout for them. They would have like lost their record deal and maybe had to pay back money and be sued and be arrested or whatever. Why? What is the difference between that and any other time that a musician has come up with this fictional sort of kayfabe around them? What was so bad about being Scottish and being rapper? Like, I understand not be able to get your foot into the door because nobody was taking you seriously. But once you've done it and once people have like given you the platform to listen to you because you tricked them into thinking that you were this thing that for whatever reason they view as more desirable, and then to like turn around and be like, okay, so you like our stuff, right? Yeah, it's great. It's amazing. Okay, well, we're actually Scottish. Like, what is the, like, it's so strange to me that would have led to like, oh, well, fuck you then. You're fired and you're sued and you're going to jail. You've deceived us. Like, I get it.
I think that just goes to prove the point, though, that it's not about the work. And most artistic achievements are typically not about the work. They're about the narrative surrounding the work. I mean, I'm not saying that that craft is non-existent. Of course it is. But they had craft. The thing that people were really drawn to about it wasn't the craft, it was the narrative, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point. And when that narrative then is revealed to be completely erroneous, the act of consumption is just like, well, I don't give a shit anymore because the thing I was coming here for isn't necessarily the craft, it was the narrative, which is hard. You choose one of those two paths, right? As a young person, as a young artist, you either choose to believe in yourself and think that the craft will propel you to the point that you need it to, or you choose to invent this story and construct a narrative. And everybody builds a narrative around themselves, whether it's the story that you tell yourself about your past traumas or the story you tell yourself about the things you will achieve in the future. Everybody tells themselves a story. The issue being, these guys told themselves a story that even they knew wasn't true. And I think that's a very interesting paradigm to interrogate. And it's very interesting to evaluate where the craft diminishes importance and where the narrative takes over and vice versa. Because at a certain point, they just wouldn't have gotten as far as they would have if that craft wasn't there. But at the same time, you know, it's nature versus nurture. You know what I mean? It's these unknowable combinations of ineffable substances. It's something that you just, as an individual, it's a thought exercise that you're never going to actually really be able to get to the end of. But I think in evaluating stuff like this, it's undeniable how important building a narrative and constructing mystique and shaping a story around you as an artist is.
Yeah. It's also really fascinating. I don't know if this is like the right time to talk about it or if there's some other later point, but just the idea that they crafted this fictional aspect of themselves in order to be taken seriously and be culturally accepted because of that narrative, that sort of high concept narrative that they were rappers performing in the UK, but they were Americans from California. And now it's sort of become the opposite, where now that's their narrative that people are interested in them because of.
Yes.
Because of
we will definitely talk about that during the documentary stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a fake narrative that you tell yourself that even you know isn't true. Sounds familiar to me. Is that something you maybe want to tip your hat to, Dave?
What are you talking about? So from here, Shallot goes back to Island Records, right? He shows them the demo tapes, and they just make millions of dollars. No. Shallot then goes around to the various record labels and tries to start a bidding war. Silibil N Brains perform a showcase for industry power players. Sony is interested, and they're going to make a huge offer, but they quickly realized, they being Silibil N Brains, that they can't work with the Sony executive because they have to go back to the US to record, And the guy asks them questions about California after their big showcase. And they're immediately just like, oh, this guy's bad news. We can't work with this dude.
Yeah, first of all, because there's video footage of this, they actually have this performance on tape. And first of all, it's like, with the knowledge that we have now to watch the video, I mean, I'm sure if you watched it beforehand, you wouldn't think anything of it. But it's so funny to watch it now, knowing what we know, because when he asks them where they're from, there's like this, you can tell that like even at this time, even though they've committed to these characters and they've committed to this plan of pretending like they're from California and pretending like they're American, they haven't quite taken a dive off the deep end to where when asked about this, they kind of like look at each other. Like, and you know, I'm like I said, I'm sure in the moment, people probably didn't think too much of it because you would have to make a real huge leap in logic to be like, oh, that was weird. I think they're not really American. Like that would be a leap in logic. There's no reason to not think that somebody is from the country that they tell you that they're from. But whenever they ask them where they're from, they don't respond. They look at each other, kind of like waiting for one of the other person to go. And it's really funny and interesting to watch, knowing that knowledge and seeing them kind of like be like, and then one of them finally kind of sheepishly being like, California, yeah. Like they do not want to.
They also don't
it.
say San Jacinto in a way that an American would say it. They say San Jacinto.
Yeah,
like San Jacinto. Also,
it's funny because they chose this place purposely to be this weird little obscure place, so that probably sheerly for the fact of like, number one, they don't have to learn too much information, and number two, because nobody that they meet and talk to will ever have been there. But then this Sony guy, when they say that, he's like, oh yes, I know it well. Like he just, out of all of the millions of things they could have chosen, this one little obscure Southern California town, this guy is like, oh yes, San Jacinto. I've been there many times. Their primary cuisine is mac and cheese bites or something. Like, I don't know, but he's like happens to know about this place. Like,
yeah, and it's so they immediately panic, and you know they're like, we can't take this big deal because he's going to want us to go back to the U.S. and we don't have U.S. passports. So they come up with a plan to sabotage the deal. Billy Boyd falsely accuses the Sony record exec of sexual harassment.
Yeah,
which is just so 2005.
Yeah, I mean,
it's so 2005.
In 2005, it's just like an offhanded thing of like, oh yeah, that guy like hit on me or whatever. But like 2020, that's like ruining a guy's whole life.
Yeah, fuck that. So from here, Sony UK takes up the cause, offering the two boys a deal. They were worried about being charged with fraud initially, but they threw caution to the winds and on Friday the 13th, 2004, signed a deal for 2 singles and an album. $50,000 for the 2 singles, $100,000 for the full album. At this point, they wake up every day and they just make music, do interviews, make special appearances, rinse and repeat. They're living the dream. They start to party at this time though. A lot. The hype starts to build and their years of grinding start to pay off. But is it really years of grinding at this point though? Like it kind of feels like it's like, yeah, they had their like self-publishing days, the DIY days, and then it kind of feels like they just kind of like fucked around in London for a while, got this showcase, got this deal, and then they just make it, they just play up the like, no, we really grinded for like fucking years.
Yeah, I mean, it does definitely seem like they totally fell into this. Like this came seemingly very easily, which is just even more just so strange that all they had to do was say that they were from California and then like success was just laid at their feet. That's so weird.
They did live as Americans for years.
Yeah,
but yes.
I don't want to discount. Like I said before, I after an hour I was done. But also the Gavin in a podcast interview, he kind of talked about this in an interesting way that I thought was a unique way of thinking about it, and just an interesting example of differences in perspective sort of informing experience. That he talked about how in those years after they had gotten the deal and they were just making the music, he talked about the fact that in the case of a lot of musicians who would be in this situation, this would feel like this whole process of while they were recording this album and the whole lead up to this would have felt like this fight, this climb to trying to make it over the hump. Like, okay, like we've got our chance, we've got this deal, we've got an opportunity to make an album. And now like we have to do this right. We have to nail this. And it's our one shot to actually become successful, huge celebrities or huge successful musicians. That's probably a period of a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty of not knowing where this is going to go, if it's going to pan out, if they're going to completely fuck it up and tank it. But for them, because they started this entire process with somebody telling them to their face, you are never going to make it because of just who you are as a person. You are Scottish. You're never going to be successful as a rapper, because that was the first point that they started at. Because of that, and because they had sort of like figured out how to hack the code to basically get into a secret room that they didn't have access to, that entire period of their lives making that album and stuff, it was just a carefree time of fun. Because every day that they spent doing that was like borrowed time or like a free pass given to them, because the whole thing started from them being told like, you are fucked. You just, because of who you are, you cannot do this thing. So yeah, he talked about it, and this was a recent interview. So maybe he was sort of pushing that narrative early on, but in more recent years, he's kind of reflected on it of just like, yeah, that was just like hanging out, having the time of our lives, because we didn't have to worry about any of that bullshit of being scared or anxious or uncertain, because we already made it to this upper echelon of something that we were told we were never going to have.
Their years of grinding were finally paying off. By the way, how old do you think they are at this point? 30, 32, 28? No, they're 21 or 22 years old, which just, again, puts it into perspective of like how quickly this happened. They start to film everything for their website. They're making their music, doing their normal shuffle, but they're also building a cult following thanks to the ubiquity of the internet. They're basically a cross between Bam Margera and Bam Margera. Doesn't Bam Margera rap or something?
Actually, he does like a weird like southern rock type music.
There you go. That's Bam Margera. Now everyone does this. They have their own YouTube channel and their own little creative ecosystem. But back in 2004, this wasn't the norm. Unfortunately, the duo start to devolve into a horrible cycle of drinking, bar fights, and dick jokes. Gavin starts developing night terrors. But these struggles of their career...
What I found interesting about that, whenever they describe the quote-unquote night terrors, what he describes, I thought it was so interesting that they were describing something, and it seemed like seemingly along the way, Gavin or nobody involved in the production of the documentary, or anybody in his life who ever talked to, or if he ever saw a doctor about this, never kind of put two and two together. But when he's describing the night terrors he had, he's describing sleep paralysis. That's what he had, 100%. He talks about how in the middle of the night, he would like sort of be in this weird hallucinatory state where he would feel like there was some kind of like demon off to the side where he couldn't look over and see it, but he could tell it was there, and it would be sort of like a pressure on his chest. That's sleep paralysis. That's what he's describing. I have that. I've had it since I was a kid. And I think over time, it slowly goes away because it doesn't really happen to me anymore. It was very frequent when I was younger, and then it got less and less. And now it's like once every, I don't even know. It's so infrequent that I've lost track of the timing of it. But 100%, that's what he's talking about. He had sleep paralysis.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's so blatantly his subconscious being guilty about lying.
Yeah.
And they don't really hold him to task or even probe in the documentary or any interview I've ever seen with him. He kind of just is like, yeah, and then when there was a fucked up period, everything got dark and we drank too much and I was gaining weight. And I had all these night terrors. They were really,
and then a demon was choking me at night. It was
like, really? Nobody's going to bring up the fact that this is obviously his subconscious being extremely guilt-ridden over the fact that he's living as a separate human? I don't know, all right. And then our boys get a big break. They appear on TRL, well, the English TRL. They perform their debut single, Your Mum. because of course it's called Your Mum. They appear in a block called 2004's Next Big Thing with bands like Kasabian and Block Party. Online chatter, message boards start to light up. People from Scotland are like, what the fuck? I know those guys. I mean, let's just back up just a second. The fact that they were on a lineup with Kasabian and Block Party is pretty, I mean, that's telling of how much they were being positioned as being the dude bro next big thing. Like both Block Party and Kasabian were massive for, whatever that, probably 5 years between 2003 or whatever and 2010, somewhere in that time period. Like they each had their moment in the sun. And that Block Party record, that shit is great. What's it called? Weekend in the City? I loved that record. Still do. So for them to get that push is a big signifier. That's not just something you fall backwards into.
If they hadn't fucked up, you would have been spinning that Silibil N Brains. Dude,
I'm about to buy the re-release of Silibil N Brains on vinyl and then go see them on their nostalgia tour where they only play things from The Loser or whatever their main record was supposed to be called. So basically it airs on TV and then everybody from their hometowns are just like, what the fuck? That's the dudes. That's obviously Billy Boyd and Gavin Bain.
What a bunch of fucking narcs.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I turn on my TV and I saw you just on TV just like doing a fucking Scandinavian accent, I'd just be
wearing robes with long blonde wig.
I'd be like, hell yeah, you go.
Sjorden Stigenskjard.
Yeah, hell yeah. I wouldn't fucking rat you out.
This is my music. I'm here for the Sjorden Stigenskjard. This is my debut record, The Evil Dead.
Hell yeah, I'd buy that shit. I'd buy the deluxe edition that came with your like little mini booklet that's like your biography. And I'd
don't pay attention to the drawings. They don't look anything like the Dave Baker. Now it's like going into like weird Italian. This whole episode is just the worst impressions episode.
I can't say that I would be out there trying to blow up your spot.
But the thing that's so fascinating to me about this turn of like, okay, so they get on TV, the internet message boards at the time are like, fuck those dudes. I know those guys. That's the guy who pushed me into a locker in college or whatever. It doesn't travel outside of the ecosystem of the internet because social media wasn't as ubiquitous. So it was just contained on these specific message boards. So, at this point, Boyd and Bain they're expecting to be found out by this. They're like, fuck, these motherfuckers are writing it. It's us. Oh shit, there's no call from the lawyer? Oh, all right, cool. Let's keep going. And nobody
cares what these Scottish people say.
Yeah. But at this point, they come up with a plan. So their plan is that they're going to come clean when the album is released. But release schedules don't work the way they thought they work. They were expecting like the day that the album drops. And then they would do a big press release or something and be like, haha, we're actually Scottish. But they got ensnared in a 6-month
haggis.
Haggis, yes.
We eat haggis.
They basically, there's the release dates don't work that way. There's like 6 months of press cycles and years of touring, and it's not like a movie where there's a definitive date.
Basically, much like anything else in the world, there is never a good time to stop lying.
Yeah.
That's why people get so lost in their lies, because there's never a good time to come clean.
And so basically at this point, Boyd has been, in a long distance relationship with Mary, his high school sweetheart or secondary school sweetheart, whatever that is in Scotland. It's not high school. He's been in a long distance relationship with her this entire time. And she kind of gives him an ultimatum.
They went to bagpipe school together.
Basically, she gives him an ultimatum where she's like, are we moving forward or not? Like, what is happening in our relationship? What is the goal for us? And he, I think for a long time, kind of grappled with that of how do I give up this thing that I love in order to pursue this other thing that I love, which I think a lot of artists struggle with. And ultimately, he decided to, for lack of a better term, try and have his cake and eat it too. And he got married. So they had a little, small-ish reception back in Scotland. And he did it. He got married, and now they're going to go and have their life, right? Not really. He still lives in London, and they're still making music. So Bain and Boyd's, their relationship starts to get frayed because of this tension of both of them being pulled in different directions, where Bain is obviously like, come on, man, like, let's fucking do this. Let's make the music. And Boyd is like, yeah, but I have these other commitments and this life that I'm supposed to be starting with Mary. And they kind of
and Mary just like, it wasn't even that he had a relationship. that was kind of pulling him away in the natural way that having a relationship would. She like actively was a type of person who's just like, I want to just be a regular nothing person from a small town. Like, I
feel like that's kind of mean the way that's phrased, but yes, she would definitely.
No, that's true. I mean, I'm not trying to be insulting. Like, that's actively what she wanted. Like, she would not want to be with him if he was like a huge celebrity. Like, she seemed like she just actively had zero interest, if not an aversion to anything outside of the normal track that a small town person would have.
Agreed. Yeah, she's not somebody who is theatrical or gregarious or outgoing in the way that Billy Boyd is, where he's kind of this kind of like theater kid trapped in a dude bro's body. And in the documentary, multiple times she's kind of just like, yeah, I didn't get it. It was really frustrating to me. I didn't want this to be a part of our life, but it was a part of our life, and it was just something I had to deal with for a period of time.
Yeah, which is interesting because, you know, I guess if they were like really annoying or if it caused them to like be an asshole to you, like I would get that. But I don't know, if I feel like if somebody was like clearly had some kind of goal that they were working towards, I feel like I'd be more understanding of it.
I think it takes a very specific type of person to be able to see it through that lens. The majority of humanity would just be like, you're fucking lying. What are you doing? You're lying. And yeah, I can't say which side of that is morally correct, but typically lies are not met well within any culture. So then at this point, the boys get a call. The record company calls and says, we got you guys an opening gig playing for your old pals, D12. And Baines and Boyd start to panic. Yes, they've said that they knew D12 and Eminem, and that they were all scene friends, and they learned all their tricks from these guys, but they'd never actually met any of them before. So what did they do? They just decided to double down. They showed up to the venue, and they were going to be the opening act. They just pretended to know D12. And D12 kind of just went along with it, thinking that they must have forgotten these two idiot white dudes from some tour in days gone by.
What a gamble.
Off without a hitch. Yeah, dude, what a fucking gamble.
Because, you know, they could have just said, like, because, you know, like, throw out the fact that they lied and pretended like they were Americans and that their whole thing is fake. Like, just pretend, like, put that aside. Every person, not every person, but every musician or whatever, anybody trying to like break into the entertainment industry, like, it's a pretty common thing that they make up embellishments about their lives and come up with these stories. And, you know, it's a common thing here in LA that everybody's like, oh yeah, like I'm friends with such and such. And then in reality, like they just worked as a PA, like, and on a production that they also worked on, and they like were introduced to them. And in LA, like, there's this weird unspoken thing where people refer to people as their friends if they've like met them once. I feel like it would have been too shocking to anybody if they were like, yeah, we were just kind of making that up. Like, we don't actually know them. We were just kind of bragging. And I don't think that would have been met with too much controversy. I feel like they would have been like, oh shit. Oh, well, okay. You're still going to go on tour with them, I guess.
Well, they fucking rolled those dice.
But they rolled the dice. And like, as much as I feel like that wouldn't have been a big deal to anybody if they had like admitted that they lied about that, I don't think that would have compromised their greater lie. But it certainly would have maybe in some subtle way chipped away at their credibility. Like, it would have been like the beginning of a bit of a chipping away of it. So as much as I feel like they could have gotten away with just admitting that they didn't know them and just being fine, they took the even bigger gamble of like, fuck it, let's just do it and just walk up to them and pretend like we know them. And it paid off. Like they rolled 2 6s on that one.
Yeah, no shit.
Oh yeah, 2 6s, and they came up with a D12.
D12? This quantifiable bullet dodged doesn't make things any easier, though. Gavin uses his perfectionism as an excuse not to release The Loser, what was to be their next record release. His constant tinkering and re-recording caused them to miss the holiday 2005 window. Is Gavin subconsciously fucking things up? Is he nervous that if he puts out a full record that it will all come crashing down? Well, his feelings don't matter. because tragedy is just around the corner. Sony goes through a downsizing, and the corporate A&R guys decide to delay the loser by 6 months. All of the, in air quotes, ally people that they had at Sony get let go, and they're ostensibly shadow banned. Siren's call of a family starts to lure Billy Boyd away from the potential goldmine that is Silibil N Brains. Is it ever going to happen? Are they ever really going to make it? Well, they stopped talking. Eventually, Boyd moved back to Scotland. Gavin spirals into a deep depression and overdoses on pills in his sister's apartment. Eventually, the lawyers called. They'd figured it out, and their contracts got pulled. And for the sake of this script, I kind of combined their stories to make it a little bit more concise, but they tell two distinctly different stories.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of differing details between, and I want to talk a lot about the story presented in the documentary versus other versions of the story told, both at the time as well as years later and more recently. There's many different details in the story from like interview to interview.
Act 3. The greatest tragedy in Scottish life. Gavin keeps performing his brains for a while. He just can't let it die. He has some middling success, but without a record contract and without the support of his manager, who cuts him loose, it doesn't really go that well. As of 2013, when the documentary was released, Billy has a giant chest tattoo that says "Family First" in massive sprawling script. Do you think he might be overcompensating for something? Maybe like, a decade of stringing Mary along and resisting starting a family? He ends up working as an oil operator on a North Sea oil derrick, helicoptering to work every day. Gavin performs in a bad rap rock band, but it's just not the same. And the following is minimal at best. However, after the documentary, The Great Hip Hop Hoax, is released, they had a second gust of momentum. They self-produced an EP titled Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, but the album didn't really go anywhere. The mega stardom that they've been searching for still eludes them. But maybe they've learned a Hallmark card lesson through this whole process. That art sometimes is just about the process of making it.
But, fair dues. Like, I never hate on anyone, to be honest. Like, the whole keep it real thing and rep your whatever, that's just bullshit, Like, fucking keep it real and make money. There
is no world where success for these two guys is just the act of making music. Like, they talk repeatedly about how they don't just want to be a guy in the scene. They want megastardom, but the likelihood of that happening, I don't agree with this, but the fact that most people who get famous are not a 45-year-old person is just kind of a reality in the world of performing. It's very rare that somebody has that ascent later in life. Even somebody like Bryan Cranston, who everybody points to, is like, well, he was X years old when Breaking Bad happened. Yeah, but he was a successful working actor for like 2 decades.
Yeah, but Dave, you're leaving out an even more impressive story than Bryan Cranston. Alan Rickman, his first movie he was ever in was Die Hard, and he was 47 years old.
Yeah, but didn't he also work as a theater actor for like 2 decades prior to that?
What bigger of a theater actor can you be than pretending to be an American guy for 2 years? They were like the world's first YouTube channel.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess so. This is a good part for us to talk about the differences between the documentary and the.
Well, here's the thing about that, and this is the thing that I really wanted to talk about, is that so the greatest hip hop hoax comes out, and it's this documentary about this story and the fact that this lie that they crafted and lived as, and sort of the rise and fall. And first of all, just as a quick aside, the interesting thing about this whole story is that when you start to read this, we're fairly versed in story tropes and how the trajectory of how stories typically go. So as one starts to read about Silibil N Brains, the assumed ending of this whole story is that they got outed at the height or at the cusp of their success. They were outed and revealed that they were faking it, and it ruined their career. But that doesn't actually really happen. It's interesting because
I don't know.
Well, that's so at least how the documentary purports it. they were never outed. Their career fizzled out because of this infighting and sort of maybe them being consumed by guilt in some kind of subconscious way. But at any rate, it's presented as like they were never actually outed. They just kind of quit. And then, and so much to the fact that later on, of his own volition, Gavin or fucking Brains just revealed it casually during a show. He was like, by the way, I'm Scottish. Ah! And, but besides that, the interesting thing is that this whole documentary is made about this, but the documentary itself is also kayfabe, because the thing that, the documentary is just basically similar to the story we've told you. The way that the documentary ends is that they've basically, so Billy, they have a falling out. Billy decides that he's tired of waiting for this to pan out. Gavin is sort of self-sabotaged by pushing back the release of these singles. The whole Sony restructuring thing happens, so they kind of miss their window. And so Billy is like, fuck this. So he leaves. They already weren't talking to each other. He goes back to just a normal life, and they never talk to each other again. And Gavin is obsessed with the idea of fame, and he just won't let the dream die. So he just stays in London, continuing to try to carve out a music career, while Billy starts a family with Mary in Scotland, gets this job working on an oil rig, has 2 kids, and he goes into all this detail about how he never missed it. It wasn't a thing where a week later, 2 weeks later, a year later, he realized that he had fucked up and he wished that he had the fame or whatever. And he says, like, I never missed it. I left and I never looked back. And he shows the chest tattoo that says family first and all that stuff. And the whole documentary ends with this. It's almost like the documentary is almost like editorialized. The documentary has a perspective, and the perspective is like Gavin is kind of like a sad, washed up loner who's clinging onto a dream that died a long time ago, and Billy has moved on and he's become a mature adult, and he has, even though he's not famous, he has carved out a more happy life for himself in his small town family than Gavin has chasing this dream in London and just being depressed, which is odd that they sort of like took that editorialized narrative stance in the documentary. It ends with this cross-cutting thing where the last 5 minutes of the documentary keep cutting from Gavin performing at little shows in London with his band, and then talking about chasing the dream and kind of being presented as sort of delusional, kind of. And then cutting to Billy suiting up to go to work, putting on this flight suit and this life vest, and it's all in slow motion. It's almost presenting him as this heroic figure, like the blue collar hero. And then
he used to piss in his hands and rub it in his face, but now he's learned about work.
Yeah. And then it all culminates with him getting into the helicopter and then flying over the sea to this oil rig. And that's how
into the literal sunset.
Yeah, and that's
he literally rides off into the sunset.
And that's how the movie ends. It ends on this note of like they've gone their separate ways. Their friendship ended back then. They haven't talked again since then. And even to the point, it's so interesting how they editorialized the ending of the movie, because the way that the literal way that the documentary ends is that they ask Gavin if he had to do it over again, would he do it the same way? And he goes, that's a good question. What did Billy say? And then it cuts to Billy getting into the helicopter and flying away, which is like almost saying like Gavin is still, he's living in the past. He's still clinging on to this thing. He still doesn't know what he wants out of life. He's directionless. He's so directionless that he doesn't even know the answer to this question, and he wants to know what Billy says. He's deferential to him in that way. And then it cuts to Billy flying off into the sunset. He's moved on. He doesn't care. They don't even show you what his answer was, because
it literally doesn't matter to him. Yeah.
But the whole thing is fake, because the same year that the fucking documentary came out, they released a new album off the strength of the documentary. So I've watched recent interviews where Gavin has said, like very recent, like a month ago, where Gavin has said that the filmmakers presented a false narrative that he's like, yeah, the way that they ended it kind of wasn't accurate, and they kind of chose this direction of presenting this false narrative, and they didn't really show the reality of the situation. But I don't know if I believe that or not. And I part of me kind of feels like, and a large part of me kind of feels like it was all a plan. The movie was this promotional piece of material, and from the very start, they planned on the movie being released and using it to restart their rap careers, because it wasn't like, oh, we made this documentary and in the production of it, we kind of reconnected, and then we got to talking, and then eventually we decided we would want to make new music. Because you would assume that, like, if that happened, the movie came out in 2013, you would have to expect that at the very least, the album would come out the year after. At the very least, you got to assume that it would take that long if their discussions started from the time that they were making the movie. But it came out the same year, like almost alongside the movie. So they were already making it. So the whole way they're presenting it in the documentary, it's obviously not true. They've obviously already reconnected. They're already back to being friends. They've already been talking about doing this music. They've already been writing new music together. But in the movie, they present it like they've had a falling out and they've just never looked back, and that Billy has chosen this life of a small town family. And the whole thing is a lie.
Well, it's also interesting, too, when you look at the divergence between that critical moment of when they stop. Because in the documentary, like you said, there's no decisive, like, okay, and now we get found out by the lawyer, or now this happens, or now somebody on the street starts screaming at me, like in the Marathon Man, you're the Billy Boyd, you're the Billy Boyd, or whatever, you know.
Great Scottish accent.
Thank you. But in interviews that they've done later, like specifically there's a Vice interview where Gavin Baines says that the lawyers started figuring out that they weren't who they said they were, specifically because they needed their passports in order to file some sort of documents or something, and they kept pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off, and that eventually the lawyers came to them and were like, look, you have to tell us what's going on. We're not sure exactly what's going on, but something is going the fuck on. Mm-hmm. And like, that's not in the documentary at all.
Yeah, they leave that whole thing out.
Yeah, and you know, whether that was the end of it, or whether that was just like a conversation that they didn't want in the documentary because it's cleaner and sadder if it just kind of, their friendship dissolves and then you get this heroic Billy being an oil worker and having a family, and you know, the sad heel turn of Gavin being the guy who can't give up the dream, or what have you. It's interesting. I don't know that I buy any of it. Like, there obviously they did certain things. Like, yes, they got the record deal, but part of me is kind of like, especially because they are now attempting to canonize themselves as like, we lied our way to the top. Like, they're trying to retroactively make themselves George Lazenby. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't really succeed. I mean, it's an interesting story, which is why we're talking about it. And there's lots of food for thought around the morality of lying and recontextualizing artistic endeavors around a personal narrative. Like, there's lots to discuss, but in terms of this meteoric rise of lying your way into the room, it's not equivalent to other people who have done similar things. George Lazenby literally became James Bond. And he fucked it up for himself, but he became James Bond. It's not like they put out a record that is either globally acclaimed or sold 1 million, copies, or, any of those things. Like, they put out a single, which is still amazing. It's very, very impressive, but it is a different thing. And they present it like we lied our way all the way up to being friends with Madonna. And like they say it in interviews multiple times of like, yeah, we were hanging out with Madonna and Green Day and whatever. And like, the real story is that one of them lied their way into an awards show and went into the after party area and drank while standing next to Green Day. Like, those are very different things. So a lot of the stuff in the documentary is them espousing this desire to come clean and stop lying. And, Billy Boyd says multiple times about, at a certain point you're lying about the lies, about the lies, about the lies. And part of me wonders, do they even really know what the real truth of the matter is, because there are so many lies and contradicting memories and stories? I don't know.
Yeah, I find it, watching the documentary and having no other frame of reference, and then after the fact doing more research and kind of learning more, it's very strange, because I feel like Gavin is relatively presented as he is, if not maybe his like sad sack, like stuck in the pastness, is maybe embellished a little bit. But ostensibly, the character that Billy is portrayed as in the movie is completely false, because he's presented in the movie as like he's just fully blue collar, small town dad guy. He doesn't care about this anymore. He's moved on. He's wearing like a polo shirt. His hair is kind of done in a way where he just looks like a normal dude. But then in interviews from the same time as the movie came out, where they're Silibil N Brains, he's dressed completely differently. He's wearing t-shirts. He's got like a kind of a styled look to his hair, and I believe they call it the fuck boy. Yeah, the mannerisms and his speaking style is different than it is in the movie. In the movie, it's presented as like he's just become like a small town Scottish guy, but then in the interviews, he's back to the syllable. He's got the accent now. He's got the Scottish accent, but he's still doing the like goofy class clown syllable guy
riffing
character. Yeah. And so it's so weird that his whole character being presented in the movie seems like it's completely fabricated to just to get like a more compelling story, where it's like, okay, so this story is going to be stronger if we present it like you've kind of gone to these different ends of the spectrum. And it all feels like it was all performative for, once again, a goal of accomplishing something to further their musical career. Which
I kind of love. I kind of think it's equally as interesting as this kind of like performative public apology and like self-flagellation as a means of expulsion of a previous version of the operating system. You know what I mean? Almost, where you're kind of just like, yeah, don't look at Windows Vista anymore. Don't look at that. Now we're on Leopard, baby. And Leopard is really sorry, but it's going to be great and you're going to love it. And we're still really good at rapping, but also we're Scottish.
Yeah. I mean, and going back to the conversation we started earlier, they were crafting their careers off of this narrative, which was that they were American rappers in the English music scene. And that was the narrative that they were capitalizing off of to get noticed and find opportunities. And now, in the same way, they are using the narrative that they were these rappers who created this hoax and were lying about where they were from as a narrative to utilize to further their careers and find opportunities. So in the same way that they lied about where they came from and all the details of their backstory, now with this new narrative, it's somewhat true. I mean, it's true. I don't want to say somewhat, because all these things did in broad strokes happen, but even then they are crafting and massaging it to be more perfect for their needs.
And I mean, I don't even think there's anything wrong with that. Like, that's smart of them to do.
Yeah.
And also, every artist who's ever done anything has done the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you really think that there's a reason why George Lucas pivoted to making children's films after he made this weirdo, crazy art movie that sunk American Zoetrope? Yes, because he needed to reframe the narrative that he was commercially viable. He was like, oh, fuck, I can't have a whole career making weirdo art movies like THX 1138. I'm going to do what I think is the safest thing financially, which is to make a nostalgia picture about childhood aimed at teenagers they have disposable income and they'll go to see movies. Great. That's what I'm going to do.
And I joined Amway, and I'm still in it to this day.
Deep Cuts brought to you by Amway.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good dovetail into just the idea of the morality of it, or whether it was right or wrong or whatever. And I guess ultimately my thought on it is, I don't see anything wrong with anything that they did. Like it was a victimless, other than that time that he accused that guy of sexual assault.
Well, the other component of that left me thinking about was like, how can you get consent from a sexual partner who doesn't know who you are? Does that make sense of what I'm asking? Maybe it's not even that. Everybody does that. Everybody embellishes aspects of themselves to ingratiate themselves into a social ecosystem, or to make somebody fall in love with them, or to have a one-night stand. Like, everybody plays those roles to a certain degree. It's just, this is such an extreme that, like, I don't know. It just feels really scummy to me. I don't know. That's the aspect of it that feels really weird to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I might agree with you if it was something more drastic. I mean, I know it was drastic, but if it was something more like, if it was like, if
I have $1 million or something.
Yeah, like, yeah, if I was like saying you're rich, or whatever, saying that something that was more pointed towards actually having emotional repercussions for doing something like that, and then them being tricked into thinking that you were something that you weren't. Like, I can't imagine anybody feeling violated by the fact that they thought that they were sleeping with an American, but they were actually sleeping with a Scottish person. Except for like a deeply bigoted against Scottish. Maybe everybody in the UK would have felt violated by that.
You really don't think that if you had a person that you spent time with, however long, and you were intimate with, and then you found out that they were just a completely separate, different person, that you wouldn't feel violated? Yeah. In some ways, yeah, the business side of it, I don't know, who cares? The artistic side of it, I think, is very interesting. The interpersonal side of it, developing friendships and everything like that, feels weird to me. But also, how do you know who you can trust? And because they did tell people, their backing band all knew that they were Scottish. They were all their friends. But when it veers into potentially deep relationships where people are needing to give consent to do things, and I don't know, that's the area that feels very strange and murky to me. I don't know. I obviously I don't have the answer for it, of like, oh, well, after 3 dates, that's when they should have told everybody that they were actually Scottish. Like, I don't fucking know. The other thing that I was so curious about is, do you think that Mary and Billy Boyd's had an arrangement that he could fuck around with other people?
Yeah, they don't reference that at all. There's a very vague reference to that, where Mary in the interviews says, like, it was a little bit stressful during that period of like him being there and wondering what he was doing and trying to call him, but he's too busy because he's at the Brit Awards. And then at the end of the documentary, she says, I don't really worry or think about what he did then. It doesn't change my feelings about him. And those are the only mentions of it. And it's almost this weird omittance. It's like an elephant in the room, where you're expecting, once again, going back to that story trope thing, you're expecting the beat in the story where he cheats on her, or she finds out he's cheating on her, and that's when he realizes that he's hit rock bottom and that he's gone too far with this, and that's the beginning of his arc to leave and go back and live in Scotland to become a family man. But that never happens. They never talk about that at all. So it's a weird elephant in the room where you have this whole story about these two guys living a debaucherous lifestyle acting as these characters that are not them as people, doing all these crazy things, filming themselves partying and running around and drinking and, you know, binge drinking and fucking going crazy on trains. And they keep referencing being around all these attractive women and things like that, but they just never put a pin in that part of it, of like, oh, what happened with Billy? Did he remain like faithful to her through that entire 2 years? He never once did anything adulterous or whatever. Like it's completely glossed over, which is very strange.
You're right. It is a big, just kind of blind spot. The other thing that's really funny to me about the documentary is the fact that Gavin Baines admits to masturbating in an American accent, which I don't even know how you do. I as soon as he said that, I was like, what does that mean? Does that mean you like grunt differently? Like, what is that?
You don't talk to yourself?
Yeah, I loved it. I was like, oh, Gavin, this is so ridiculous. I love that you just said I masturbated in an American accent.
I do it full Scottish.
We know. We definitely know.
Yeah. Another thing is that the something I thought about after watching the documentary and then looking more into the other parts of the story that are kind of left out of the documentary or have happened since then. I feel sorry for Mary. I wonder what she thinks about everything, because in the documentary, she is presented as this very kind of like demure, this very demure person who does not want to be involved in any of the weird drama. She doesn't like the idea of her life being drawn focus to, all of the stuff with his fame and being hanging out with all these celebrities and being in this hip hop world. Doesn't seem like it's her cup of tea at all. And so in the movie, it's sort of drawn as this happy ending of like, he had this girlfriend and he did this thing for several years and she stuck by him that whole time and kind of put in the work and let him get that out of his system. And then he came home and they had a happily ever after ending where he put all that stuff behind him, became the small town normal guy that she wanted. And that's just their life now. But in real life, that didn't happen at all. He went back to doing the rap stuff and trying to kickstart their career. So the real life, at least in the way that Mary's presented in the documentary, I just really wonder how she felt or thought about that second coming of them trying to be rappers.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If they had released a full album, do you think it would have gone differently?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they keep saying in the documentary, like, we were trying to take over the world, not them specifically, but like other people, like their managers and things like that. Like everybody was acting like they were going to be like Eminem level. I don't think that would have happened, but I do think that they would have been maybe a couple rungs below that, but I do think that they would have found some fame. Their music it's this very specific type of kind of their style. It's not the like British grime style. It's like that early 2000s A$AP Rock.
Also, like, a lot of Twista, that whole like
dictionary.
Yeah, it's like that.
It's
type of
it's dictionary.
spitting.
It's dictionary rap, which I think a lot of people there's a lot of artists like that. There's like A$AP Rock and even Eminem has a little bit of that. He's not really exactly that style, but he kind of has a little bit of it in him. Or Logic or Token or the fuck is his name? Watsky. They are typically white guys who use very, very well crafted lyrical acrobatics as sort of the main event of what they do. So it's a lot of like really intricate, really fast rapping. And it usually has a lot of like academic wordplay to it. And it's kind of criticized within the hip hop community as kind of not really having a lot of meaning or feeling to it. It's just a lot of like words. It just doesn't have the same meaning or passion or perspective that other types of hip hop have. And people like it, but I think in general, it's kind of sort of thought of as kind of like a parlor trick, kind of. That's the kind of stuff that they do. I don't think that an artist like that would ever be at the level of like an Eminem or a huge celebrity. I'm just using Eminem as an example because he's another white rapper, but I don't think they would have ever reached that level because I just don't think that type of music is capable of being at that level.
Yeah, the only thing I would say...
I do think that they would have been a known commodity.
I think the only thing that I would offer as a counterpoint is that I could very easily see a world where, similar to how Bam Margera used skateboarding as a jumping off point into becoming just a kind of general youth culture figure, I could very easily have seen these guys using rap to then have their own reality show or, you know, sketch show or whatever, and then have that be almost like, oh yeah, that's right, they used to be rappers, but they're really the guys who eat dog feces or whatever it is that they were doing on their show.
Yeah, totally.
I don't necessarily know that they would have been anything other than like, oh yeah, remember those guys who were not Jackass? But you never know. I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts about this? About Silibil N Brains?
The biggest thing that I find interesting is just the fact that they made a documentary about how they lied and crafted a kayfabe world around them in order to find success. But the documentary in and of itself is also a crafted lie, kayfabe story to use as a piece of promotional material to kickstart their career. It didn't really happen. And now it's happening again because they just did this Vice video and he's starting to do more press now. And I listened to a podcast that was from like a month ago. So it's like every once in a while, this thing can kind of pop to the surface, whether they're sort of doing it on purpose or it just kind of organically happens. And then whenever it starts to happen, they try to like write it like, okay, people are starting to talk about us again. Like now's our chance. And then they start doing press and interviews and things like that, to the point where I feel like we could probably get those guys to, or specifically Brains. I guarantee we could get that guy to talk to us.
Yeah.
But I guess that leads to my real closing thought, which is, as much as it's kind of not actually true and it was just kind of crafted, the thing that got to me the most in the documentary, which I think kind of gets to me a lot, and I don't know what this says about me as a person, but there's something very tragic to me about friendships being destroyed by things. And I always feel a great sense of sadness from hearing stories where two people or a group of people were like very close friends and, you know, were friends for years and decades, or they grew up together or whatever. They did everything together and they were like, you know, super close in that way. And then to achieve something as cool as becoming a successful, or on your way to becoming a successful rap duo, it's really sad to me that you can accomplish something like that with a friend and then that thing can actually destroy the friendship. That's so tragic to me. And I have a particular thing about friendships and friendships being destroyed, and that narrative like really gets to me. And it's like one of the saddest things I can think of is a friendship being destroyed for any reason, let alone a friendship being destroyed because you built something together. That seems so ironically sad to me. What makes it even sadder, as much as that really wasn't actually true, and in reality, they were reforming and doing an album, and it wasn't the way the documentary painted it as, I think to a certain degree, it still kind of is true. I think that Billy's attachment and involvement in Silibil N Brains is very tenuous and very kind of like, sure, I'll give it a shot. But ultimately, he's not as dedicated to it as Gavin is. So if you look at their YouTube channel, it kind of paints this very sad picture, at least to me, where I'll actually bring it up right now. So this is the point where the documentary had come out and they were releasing their their album Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. So they did this music video for a song on the album called Eat Your Brains. They have this moment where they're like, yeah, we're back. We're making music again.
7 years
ago. We're together.
Ago.
We've reunited and we're making an album. They come out with this music video. Music video, you know, gets a decent amount of, it's 70,000 views. That's obviously wasn't some huge rise back to fame, but it seems like they got, probably largely from the strength of the documentary, they actually got some eyes on this music video. But then you can tell that kind of nothing came of that, because you have this string of videos uploaded at that time. So the YouTube channel starts 7 years ago when the documentary and the album came out. And there's a bunch of videos from that time, 7 years ago in 2013. And then after a bunch of clips of live shows and promotions and making ofs of the music video and all this stuff, the music video drops, and then nothing for a year. So you can see that moment where like this build up, and then the music video dropped, and then nothing happened. No traction was gained, and they just didn't post anything for a whole year. And then they posted one random little clip. It's literally 34 seconds long a year later. And then 2 years after that, after that one clip, there's nothing for 2 years posted on this channel. And then 2 years later, somebody uploaded just all the tracks from the album as YouTube videos. And then nothing for another 2 years is posted on this channel. And then after 2 years ago, so 2018, then it just starts being a bunch of videos of Gavin by himself rapping. So it's like clips of him doing freestyles and clips of songs that he made alone that are just Brains McLeod. And that goes on for the whole rest of it. Starting from 2 years ago up until 6 hours ago, it's all just Gavin stuff. And so you kind of see this story play out where they reunited. There was all this hype of bringing the band back together. The documentary comes out, and then it kind of just doesn't go anywhere. And you can see the interest by Billy kind of fizzle out. Maybe he just went back home. And then at the end of the day, it all just goes back to just being Gavin by himself, still trying to keep the dream alive. And the Vice video that came out a couple days ago, it's just Gavin. All the interviews that he's doing, all the podcast appearances he's doing, it's just Gavin. Billy's not involved in any of this stuff. So, you know, even though the documentary kind of conveyed a slightly inaccurate story for the sake of crafting a narrative that, number one, would be a better story for the movie, but also maybe to help promote their miraculous return. It still kind of is true. It still kind of is true that this whole thing drove a wedge between them. And at the end of the day, no matter how much he sometimes gets Billy to come back and be involved in it, it's still just Billy living his life with his family and Gavin just kind of alone trying to keep this thing going. And that's super sad to me. Not even because of the idea of Gavin like trying to keep this dream alive and he's in his 40s still trying to be this like rapper, but just more for the friendship aspect of it and the fact that they were like so good of friends. They clearly admired each other immensely, and now they're just not friends anymore. It's really sad to me.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Andrew Price.
This has been Deep Cuts. You can find me online at heydavebaker.com, where you can pick up comics like Action Hospital or Fuck Off Squad or some of the other comics that are on there. Andrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me back in my hometown, working a blue-collar job, supporting my family, having left this dream of running a successful podcast behind me. And you can also find me at dapricerights.com.
Deep Cuts is a production by Boyd Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boydgeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.